History is full of gaps, not because nothing happened, but because someone decided what was worth remembering. In this episode, we turn toward the women who were left out, the ones who led revolutions, built institutions, raised generations, and shaped futures, yet whose names rarely appear in textbooks or archives. We will remember Fatima al-Fihri, who founded the world's first university, Asantewaa, who led a rebellion against empire, Muthoni or Kirima, who fought in the forests of Kenya for freedom, and my own grandmother, a woman of virtue and valor, whose wisdom shaped my life but never made it into the celebratory books of history. We will explore how forgetting is not just an accident, it's a form of injustice, and how remembering becomes an act of resistance, restoration, and love. So if you've ever wondered whose stories were missing, if you've ever felt the weight of silence where a name should be, this episode is for you. Welcome back to the podcast. What about me? It's me, your host, Linda. What does it mean to be written out of history? To live, to lead, to shape the world, and yet remain unnamed in the archives, unmentioned in textbooks, unremembered in the stories we pass down. Historical erasure isn't just a matter of oversight, it's a matter of a deliberate silencing that intersects with gender, race, class, and power. Women who defied norms, led revolutions, healed communities, built institutions. Too often their names were omitted, their legacies buried beneath patriarchal narratives or colonial frameworks. And sometimes the forgetting happens closer to home. I think of my great-grandma, a matriarch, whose wisdom shaped generations. She wasn't a politician or a scholar. She didn't rewrite history books or hold courts, but she held something deeper, the rhythm of justice in her storytelling, the quiet authority in her prayers, the fierce tenderness with which she protected children not her own. Her name isn't in any official record, but her impact lives in the way my mother speaks, the way I advocate, the way our family understands dignity. This episode is for her and for every woman whose story was never written, but whose legacy still pulls beneath the surface of history. My grandma is a woman of virtue and valor. When I think of the forgotten women of history, I don't have to look far. My grandmother was married at 13, a child by today's standards, but already stepping into the role tradition had carved out for her. She bore 7 children and raised them with one unwavering belief: education is the key. She used to say, once you achieve that goal, life is better. And she lived that truth, not through formal schooling, but through experience, grief, and wisdom. Her husband, my grandfather, fought alongside the British in World War II. When he passed, she became the sole provider. She took on odd jobs, stretched every coin, and never let her children feel the full weight of loss. She taught me to be vigilant, to trust common sense when knowledge felt out of reach. We would walk to the market together, and she would share stories, not just about survival, but about life, about dignity, about how to carry yourself when the world doesn't see you. She never made it into the celebratory books of history, but to me, she was a pioneer, a woman of valor, a woman of virtue, a woman worth to be celebrated. While her peers were attending missionary schools in Uganda, she was learning through lived experience, and she passed that education on to her children, to her grandchildren, and to me. Her birth was never registered. We estimate she lived to at least 79 years, maybe more. Her younger sister, who became a teacher, helped push my grandmother's children through the education system. That sister had the paperwork. My grandmother had the vision. She is the reason I speak, the reason I advocate, the reason I believe that wisdom doesn't always wear a cap and a gown. It sometimes walks barefoot to the market, telling stories that shape generations. There's a lot to tell about my grandma, but just a few I can recite. My grandmother's story isn't unique, but that's precisely the tragedy. Across continents and centuries, women like her have shaped families, communities, and futures without ever being named in the official records. They were the backbone of resistance, the quiet architects of progress, the keepers of wisdom passed down in kitchens, fields, and marketplaces. So I want to ask you, dear listener, who is the forgotten woman in your story? Maybe she's your grandmother, your aunt, a neighbor, a teacher. Maybe she's someone whose name you only heard once, but whose impact lingers. Share her name, share her story. You can write to me, post online, or simply speak her memory aloud, because remembering is resistance. And every time we tell these stories, we rewrite the record. Next, we will journey into the life of the woman who built a university, Fatima al-Fihri. Let's begin. In 9th century Morocco, in the city of Fez, here lived a woman named Fatima, a visionary, a philanthropist, and a pioneer in education. She was born into a wealthy family of migrants from Tunisia. Her father, a successful merchant, ensured she and her sister received a strong education, rare for women at the time. When her father and husband passed away, Fatima inherited a substantial fortune, but instead of retreating into private life, she chose to build something extraordinary, a mosque and learning center that would become the world's first university, predating Oxford, Bologna, and Sorbonne. She oversaw its construction herself, fasting throughout the process as a spiritual offering. The university became a beacon of scholarship, attracting students from across the Islamic world and beyond. It offered courses in theology, law, astronomy, grammar, and medicine. It was a place where knowledge was sacred and accessible. But Fatima's name, it was nearly lost. Where was she forgotten? Because history, as it's often written, prefers male architects. Because colonial narratives dismissed Islamic contribution to global education. Because women's philanthropology is too often seen as charity, not legacy. Why does she matter now? Because she reminds us that women have already built institutions, not just homes. Because in a world where debating girls' access to education, Fatima's story is a rebuke to every gatekeeper. Because she proves that faith and intellect are not opposites, they are allies. Fatima didn't just found a university, she founded a tradition of learning that still exists today. And yet, how many of us were taught her name? Let's say it again. Fatima al-Fihri, a woman of vision, a woman of legacy, a woman we must remember. What about the warrior queen who defied the empire?
1896, King Prempeh, king of the Asante, is sent into exile by the British, leaving his people in disarray. But from that disarray steps forward the Queen Mother, Yaa Asantewaa, prepared to take the arrogance of the British.
The warrior queen who defied the empire of Britain, Yaa Asantewaa. Now we travel to the Gold Coast, modern day Ghana. It's 1900s and the British Empire is tightening its grip on West Africa. They've exiled the Asante king and demanded the sacred golden stool, a symbol of the soul of the Asante people. Enter Yaa Asantewaa, a queen mother, a farmer, a political advisor, and when no one else would step forward, a warrior. In a room full of hesitant male chiefs, she rose and declared, I quote, if you, the men of Asante, will not go forward, then we will. We, the women, will. I shall call upon my fellow women. We will fight. Close quotes. and she did. Yaa Asantewaa led the War of the Golden Stool, the last major resistance against British colonial rule in the region. She organized troops, strategized attacks, and held her ground for months. Though eventually captured and exiled to Seychelles, her defiance became a legend. Why was she forgotten? Because colonial history books rarely honor African resistance, especially when led by women. Because her leadership was framed as emotional, not strategic. Because the image of a grandmother commanding troops didn't fit the imperial narrative. Why does she matter now? Because she reminds us that courage isn't gendered, because her story challenges the idea that women are passive in times of crisis, because in every movement for justice, there are women like Yaa organizing, leading, sacrificing, often without recognition. Her legacy lives on in Ghanaian memory, in feminist scholarship, in the spirit of every woman who says, if no one else will fight, I will fight. Let's remember her name, Yaa Asantewaa, a queen, a warrior, a mother of resistance. Then there is another woman from East Africa, Kenya. In the forest of colonial Kenya, a woman moved like shadow and flame. Her name was Muthoni wa Kirima, the only female field marshal in the Mau Mau uprising against British rule. Born in 1930, Muthoni witnessed the brutal injustices of colonial land seizures and racial segregation. She joined the resistance as a teenager, leaving behind her home, her comfort, and eventually her hair, shaving it as a symbol of total commitment to the cause. She rose through the ranks not as a token but a tactician. She led troops, planned ambushes, and survived years in the forest, facing hunger, betrayal, and relentless violence. Her nickname, Field Marshal Muthoni, a title earned, not given. Why was she forgotten? Because colonial records dismissed Mau Mau fighters as terrorists. Because post-independence Kenya was eager to move on and uncomfortable with women who had wielded guns. Because her story didn't fit the sanitized version of nation building. Why does she matter now? Because she challenges the myth that women only supported resistance from the sidelines, because her courage exposes the cost of freedom and the gendered silence that follows it. Because even in her old age, she wore her shaved head as a badge of honor, refusing to conform to the expectations of femininity or forgetfulness. Muthoni wa Kirima didn't just fight for land, she fought for dignity, for memory, for a Kenya that would one day remember her name. Always remember the women like Muthoni wa Kirima are fighters, are leaders, are women history tried to forget but never truly could forget. And always remember that same woman could be you, and rise up. The power of remembering the women who have shaped our lives, the women who have shaped kingdoms and nations, remembering that these women had the fear of God in them, that without the power that God had placed in them, they wouldn't have achieved what they were able to achieve. What do these women have in common? A grandma who taught through experience, a scholar who built a university, a queen who led a rebellion, a fighter who lived in the forest for freedom. They came from different lands, different centuries, different struggles, but they were all written out, all written over. Forgetting is not neutral. It's a form of injustice. It's how systems preserve power by erasing those who challenged it, especially when those challengers were women. When we forget Fatima, we erase the legacy of Muslim women in education. When we forget Yaa Asantewaa, we silence African resistance. When we forget Muthoni wa Kirima, we deny the role of women in liberation. And when we forget our grandmothers, we lose the wisdom that shaped our very lives. but remembering is resistance. It's how we reclaim space. It's how we honor truth. It's how we say, you mattered, you still matter. Your voice mattered then, your voice still matters today. And so I invite you, listener, to pause. Think of a woman in your life, past or present, whose story deserves to be told. Maybe she raised you, maybe she taught you, maybe she walked beside you in a silence, carrying burdens you never saw. Say her name, write it down, share it with someone, because every time we remember, we rewrite the record. This episode is not just about history, it's about healing. It's about restoring what was lost. It's about saying we see you, we remember you, and we honor your works and legacy today. We have remembered women who built, who fought, who nurtured, who led. Women whose names were nearly lost, but whose legacies still shape our world. And perhaps someone in your own life whose story deserves to be told. These women remind us that history is not just what's written, it's what is lived. It's what's passed down in stories, in silence, in strength. To forget them is to lose part of ourselves. To remember them is to reclaim truth, dignity, and possibility. So today I invite you to speak a name, because every act of remembrance is a step toward justice. To remember is how we restore what was broken and honor those the world chose to forget. Thank you for listening today. Hopefully this episode reminded you of someone in your world who made a change. Bye.